Afternoon. I received a report concerning a questionable individual in the vicinity, potentially armed. Would you mind clarifying the nature of that pole you're holding? It's a mobility aid. I am visually impaired and awaiting public transportation. I see. To me, it bears the resemblance of an offensive implement. It assists me in locating the pavement, thus preventing me from stepping into vehicular traffic. Your appearance does not suggest a lack of sight. You directly observed me when I addressed you. My blindness does not impede my hearing. I am fully aware of your position. Officer Brian Matthew, bearing the identification number 5823 from the Riverside Police Department, observed a gentleman of color positioned at a bus stop, accompanied by a white cane. He immediately inferred malicious intent rather than a physical impairment. He insisted that Elijah surrender what he perceived as a weapon. When Elijah stated, "This is not an offensive tool. It is a cane designed for mobility. Its purpose is to facilitate my safe passage," Matthew retorted, "I shall determine its designation," and forcibly removed it from Elijah's grasp. Subsequently, Matthew confiscated Elijah's protective eyewear, initiated an apprehension based on charges of possessing an implement of violence and providing fabricated information, and compelled a sightless individual into a police vehicle, leaving him disoriented and without his essential mobility device. What Officer Matthew failed to comprehend was that Elijah Turner had been without sight since his formative years, was widely recognized within the community as a champion for disability rights, and that high-definition surveillance footage, coupled with bystander recordings, documented the entirety of the incident. Furthermore, his prejudgment that an African-American man was feigning visual impairment would ultimately result in the forfeiture of his badge and a compensatory judgment of $9.2 million from the federal court. Before we proceed further, could you indicate the city or nation from which you are viewing this presentation? Kindly share this information in the comments section. We are keen to observe the global reach of our audience. If you concur that assumptions predicated on one's complexion can inflict irreparable harm upon innocent individuals and must be brought to light, please ensure you express your approval of this video and subscribe to our channel. Elijah Turner had been deprived of his sight from the tender age of 4, when an ailment during his youth irrevocably damaged his optic nerves, plunging him into perpetual obscurity. Presently, at the age of 47, he had dedicated 43 years to navigating a world meticulously constructed for those with unimpaired vision, and he had achieved an exceptional proficiency in this endeavor. He was employed as a counselor at the Veterans Disability Resource Center, where he provided guidance to fellow disabled veterans in adapting to life with their injuries. He served as a member of the city's ADA Compliance Board, offering counsel to local authorities on matters pertaining to accessibility. Twice each week, he conducted mobility workshops, instructing newly sightless individuals on the effective utilization of white canes for secure traversal. His existence was rich, productive, and self-reliant, meticulously built upon decades of diligent effort and the instruments that enabled his autonomy. Paramount among these instruments was his white cane, a collapsible mobility apparatus adorned with crimson reflective bands, which he carried with him at all times. On this particular Tuesday afternoon in late September, Elijah was seated on a bench at the Riverside Avenue bus stop, his cane resting across his lap, awaiting the arrival of the number 7 bus that would convey him homeward following a demanding day at the resource center. He was attired in dark protective spectacles to shield his sensitive eyes from solar radiation. Beside him sat his work satchel, containing documents, his portable computer, and the necessary materials for his upcoming mobility instruction session. The bus stop was a familiar locale. He had utilized this precise stop 5 days a week for the preceding 6 years, occupying this identical bench and following the same route home. Other regular patrons recognized him, and the bus operators were accustomed to announcing their route numbers upon arrival, ensuring Elijah could ascertain which bus had arrived. It was 5:20 in the afternoon, and the bus stop was moderately populated with individuals concluding their workday. Elijah sat in quiet contemplation, engrossed in an audiobook through a single earbud, while maintaining auditory awareness of his surroundings with the other. He detected the cadence of footsteps, the hum of vehicular engines, the murmur of conversations, the quintessential sounds of an urban bus stop during peak transit hours. What eluded his perception due to its silent approach, was the police cruiser that glided to a halt near the bus stop and pulled over at the curb. Officer Matthew had been a member of the Riverside Police Department for 8 years, during which time his personnel file had amassed 17 civilian grievances. 8 of these complaints originated from individuals with disabilities, who accused him of harassment, skepticism, or the use of excessive force. 3 specifically involved sightless individuals who alleged that Matthew had questioned the authenticity of their blindness, confiscated their canes, or accused them of exploiting their disability as a pretext for suspicious conduct. The Internal Affairs Division had reviewed Matthew's record on 2 separate occasions and identified concerning patterns. However, he had never faced significant disciplinary action. His superiors regarded him as aggressive yet effective, the type of officer who did not hesitate to initiate stops that others might forgo. Earlier that afternoon, the dispatch center had received a communication from an unidentified caller reporting a suspicious African-American male exhibiting a peculiar implement or stick at the Riverside Avenue bus stop. The caller had terminated the connection prematurely, preventing the provision of any detailed information, and the description was, at best, imprecise. Upon receiving the dispatch over Matthew's radio, he was a mere 2 blocks away and elected to respond. He arrived at the bus stop, surveyed the area, and his gaze immediately fixated upon Elijah, who was seated on the bench with the white cane positioned across his lap. Matthew perceived an African-American male holding what appeared to be a stick, and his mind instantly drew a correlation to the weapons report. The presence of red reflective bands on the cane, its clear designation as a mobility aid, Elijah's occupation of dark spectacles, and his tranquil demeanor, none of these details registered as significant. Matthew saw what his ingrained biases compelled him to perceive, a potential threat requiring immediate confrontation. He disembarked from his patrol vehicle and proceeded directly toward the bench, his hand already moving toward his utility belt in a gesture of authority and readiness. Elijah detected the approach of heavy footsteps, but did not react, as individuals frequently traversed the bus stop area. It was not until Matthew halted directly before him and spoke that Elijah recognized the footsteps were directed at him. "Halt, you there? What are you engaged in?" Elijah turned his head in the direction of the voice, his expression a tableau of bewilderment. The tone was adversarial, demanding, utterly dissimilar to the amicable exchanges he typically experienced with individuals at the bus stop. "You? Are you addressing me?" "I received a report regarding a suspicious African-American male in possession of a hazardous implement," Matthew stated, his voice amplified sufficiently to draw the attention of other individuals at the bus stop. "That describes you. What is that implement you are holding?" Elijah's bewilderment intensified, yet he maintained a composed and patient vocalization, mirroring the cadence he employed when elucidating concepts to new clients at the resource center. "I am visually impaired. This is my walking stick. It is a cane for the sightless." "Silence! You are fabricating the truth," Matthew interjected sharply, his voice escalating with vexation. "You are demonstrably capable of seeing. You directly observed me when I approached." Elijah experienced a familiar sense of unease, recognizing that the situation was deteriorating in a manner he had encountered previously, albeit never with such overt hostility. "I turn toward the sound of your voice, sir. I am blind, not deaf. I cannot perceive you, and I am entirely without sight. And this is a standard white cane." Matthew advanced closer, and Elijah could discern the rustle of his boots and sense the intrusion of someone violating his personal space. "I find that improbable. You are likely casing this location, perhaps anticipating the arrival of Confederates for the purpose of perpetrating a robbery." "Sir, I am merely awaiting the bus," Elijah responded, a tremor of apprehension now present in his voice as he discerned the perilous assumptions being formulated. He had provided counsel to a sufficient number of veterans suffering from PTSD and trauma to recognize when a scenario was escalating beyond rational bounds. "Indeed you are," Matthew asserted, extending his hand toward the cane. "Relinquish that implement." Elijah instinctively drew the cane closer to his person, a defensive maneuver born of an understanding of the tool's critical importance to his safety. "It is not an implement of violence. It is a cane for mobility. Its purpose is to enable me to navigate securely." "I shall determine its nature." Matthew declared, his hand closing around the cane. Around them, other individuals at the bus stop had ceased their conversations and were observing the unfolding confrontation. A woman in her 30s produced her mobile device and commenced recording. A gentleman in a business suit moved nearer, his countenance etched with concern. The surveillance camera positioned on the roof of the bus shelter continued its unceasing vigil, capturing every utterance and gesture in high definition. Elijah felt the resistance on his cane and maintained his hold, not aggressively, but with a firm grip, attempting one final plea. Officer, I implore you, I require this. I am unable to see. I cannot navigate safely without my cane. I utilize it to detect impediments, curbs, and changes in elevation. Please do not confiscate it. Matthew exerted a forceful tug, and the cane was wrenched from Elijah's grasp. Bereft of it, Elijah immediately experienced a profound sense of disorientation. His primary instrument for navigating the world was abruptly absent. He extended his hands instinctively, attempting to reestablish his bearings. His hands searched for the familiar weight and balance of the cane. Cease your resistance, Matthew commanded, misinterpreting Elijah's outstretched hands as an act of aggression, rather than the desperate attempt of a sightless individual to regain his orientation. I am not resisting, Elijah stated, his voice now strained with genuine fear. I am blind. I cannot see. Kindly return my cane. Matthew disregarded his plea and reached for Elijah's face, seizing the dark, protective spectacles. And remove those spectacles. Permit me to examine your eyes. I require these, Elijah protested, attempting to avert his head. My eyes are sensitive to light. Please desist. Matthew violently snatched the spectacles from Elijah's face, and the abrupt exposure to the afternoon sun caused Elijah to squint and turn away. His eyes, compromised since childhood, failed to focus on any discernible object. They moved erratically, seeking visual input that would never materialize, a hallmark indicator of individuals with severe optic nerve damage. However, Matthew did not perceive a disability. He saw only what he wished to see. See, you are perfectly fine. You are perpetrating a deception. You are under arrest. Elijah heard the metallic click and recognized the sound of handcuffs. Under arrest for what offense? I have committed no infraction. Possession of a weapon, resisting arrest, and providing false information to a law enforcement officer, Matthew stated, seizing Elijah's arm and drawing it behind his back. The woman recording interjected, her voice sharp with indignation. He is blind. That is his cane. What are you doing? Retreat, or you too will face apprehension for interference, Matthew retorted without even glancing in her direction. The gentleman in the business suit stepped forward. Officer, I can assure you that this gentleman is employed at the Veterans Disability Resource Center. I am acquainted with him. His name is Elijah. He is employed at the VA facility. He is visually impaired. That is his mobility cane. Matthew ignored him and snapped the second handcuff onto Elijah's other wrist. Elijah stood there, manacled, without his cane, without his spectacles, completely disoriented and incapable of perceiving his surroundings. He could discern voices, the protests of onlookers, and the officer's communication with dispatch for backup. But he could not ascertain his location, could not navigate, and could not even protect himself from stumbling into objects. I cannot see, Elijah articulated once more, his voice faltering slightly. I have no spatial awareness. I require my cane. You will retrieve it at the precinct, Matthew stated, directing him brusquely toward the patrol car. Elijah faltered, unable to perceive the curb, and Matthew grasped him with an exasperated grunt. Mind your step. I am incapable of observing my surroundings, Elijah responded quietly. I am sightless. However, Officer Brian Matthew had already arrived at a definitive conclusion that this was an untruth, and nothing Elijah could articulate would sway his conviction. The surveillance camera meticulously recorded the entire event. The personal devices of witnesses captured every moment, and within the span of an hour, the video began to proliferate across social media platforms, revealing to the world precisely what transpired when a police officer refused to acknowledge the veracity of a blind man's condition. Matthew guided Elijah toward the patrol car, his hand firmly grasping his arm, treating him as any other suspect being conveyed into custody. Elijah stumbled twice during the brief journey from the bench to the curb, his lack of visual input preventing him from accurately gauging his footing. Each instance he lost his equilibrium, Matthew tightened his grip and declared, "Cease your resistance." Despite Elijah offering no resistance whatsoever, he was, in essence, a sightless individual, attempting to ambulate without the crucial navigational aid that typically alerted him to obstacles. "I am not resisting," Elijah conveyed, his voice strained. "I cannot perceive the ground. I am unaware of where to place my feet." Matthew opened the rear door of the patrol car and placed his hand atop Elijah's head to urge him into the seat. Elijah impacted his shoulder against the doorframe, a consequence of his inability to perceive the opening. Matthew then applied greater force. "Enter the vehicle." Elijah settled onto the unyielding plastic seating, his hands still cuffed behind his back, utterly disoriented. He possessed no comprehension of his orientation within the vehicle, could not perceive the interior, nor could he ascertain if any objects were positioned before him that he might collide with should the vehicle decelerate abruptly. The door slammed shut, and he heard Matthew depart. Through the sealed window, Elijah could discern voices from outside. The woman who had been recording remained present, and her voice carried with distinct clarity. "You have just apprehended a blind individual. He was not engaged in any illicit activity. He was awaiting public transportation." Matthew's voice returned, sharp and dismissive. "Madam, I instructed you to maintain your distance. This matter does not concern you." "I am recording this," the woman stated. "Everyone witnessed your actions. You confiscated his cane and apprehended him for being sightless." "He was in possession of a weapon and fabricating his condition," Matthew asserted. "Now step back, or you will accompany him into the vehicle." The gentleman in the business suit reiterated his concern. "Officer, I am informing you that this gentleman is employed at the Veterans Disability Resource Center. He is a counselor. He conducts mobility classes for visually impaired individuals. You have made an error." "I have made no error," Matthew declared, yet a discernible edge of defensiveness had crept into his tone, suggesting a nascent sense of uncertainty. "I responded to a report of a weapon and encountered an individual matching the description." Another voice joined the chorus, that of an elderly woman who had also been awaiting transit. "I observe him here daily, without fail. He invariably possesses that cane. He is visually impaired. It is evident to anyone." Matthew returned to his patrol vehicle and assumed the driver's seat, thereby concluding the discussion. He radioed dispatch. "This is Unit 47. I have one individual in custody en route to central booking. Charges include weapons violation and false information." Dispatch acknowledged with its standard confirmation, and Matthew proceeded to depart from the curb. In the rear compartment, Elijah remained perfectly still, attempting to orient himself through auditory cues and the motion of the vehicle. He could discern the sounds of traffic, could perceive the vehicle's turns, but nothing provided him with a visual frame of reference, as no such reference was available. He had been without sight for 43 years, and had never experienced a greater sense of helplessness than in that moment, seated in the back of a police car, bereft of his cane and his spectacles. "Officer Matthew," Elijah articulated, maintaining a calm and respectful tone, "I implore you to comprehend this. I am genuinely visually impaired. I possess medical documentation. I am registered with the State Commission for the Blind. I can furnish you with the names of individuals who can corroborate my condition. Please, contact someone before we reach the station." "You will have the opportunity to articulate all of that during the booking process," Matthew replied without turning around. "My cane is a medical device," Elijah continued. "To remove it from my possession is analogous to confiscating a wheelchair from an individual unable to ambulate. I require it for my safety. I need it to navigate. Kindly refrain from treating it as evidence. It is not a weapon." Matthew offered no response. The silence persisted for the remainder of the journey, which lasted approximately 8 minutes. Upon their arrival at the police station, Matthew parked the vehicle in the garage and proceeded to open the rear door. Elijah heard the click of the door handle and attempted to prepare himself for whatever lay ahead. "Exit the vehicle," Matthew commanded. Elijah proceeded cautiously, sliding across the seat until his feet made contact with the ground. He stood slowly, uncertain of the surrounding space, and Matthew grasped his arm once more. They traversed what sounded like a parking garage, then passed through a door that led into the station. Elijah could discern voices, the rhythm of footsteps, and the reverberation of a sizable indoor area, but he could not visualize any of it. He was entirely reliant on Matthew for guidance, and Matthew was treating him as a criminal rather than a sightless individual requiring assistance. They reached the booking area, and Matthew halted. Elijah detected another voice, a deeper male timbre, which sounded older and conveyed an air of authority. "What have we here?" the voice inquired. "Weapons violation," Matthew responded. The subject was located at a bus stop with what appeared to be an implement. He refused to cooperate. He claimed to be visually impaired. "Claimed?" the other voice repeated, a note of concern now evident. "He is fabricating his impairment," Matthew asserted. "I observed him surveying his surroundings. He is perpetrating a falsehood regarding his blindness." Elijah experienced a flicker of hope as the other voice sounded skeptical of Matthew's explanation. He spoke up, addressing the new individual. "Sir, I am not fabricating anything. I have been sightless since I was 4 years old. I possess medical records. I am employed at the Veterans Disability Resource Center. I was merely awaiting my bus when Officer Matthew confiscated my mobility cane and apprehended me." There was a brief pause, followed by the other voice stating, "Sergeant Williams, and your designation?" "Elijah Turner." Elijah stated, "I require the return of my cane. I cannot see. I cannot navigate without it." Sergeant Williams stepped closer, and Elijah heard his footsteps circumnavigating him. "Officer Matthew, where is this implement you are referring to?" "In my trunk," Matthew replied, "and it is some form of stick." "Retrieve it," Williams commanded, his tone clearly indicating it was not a suggestion. Matthew departed and Elijah remained standing, handcuffed, unable to perceive the sergeant or anyone else in the vicinity. He heard murmuring, the sounds of other individuals moving about, the general cacophony of a bustling police station in operation around him. And he waited, hoping that someone would finally heed his words and grasp that he was speaking the truth. Matthew returned, carrying Elijah's white cane, and placed it on the booking desk. Sergeant Williams retrieved it and examined it meticulously, turning it over in his hands. The cane was clearly marked with red reflective bands, possessed a rubberized tip designed for tactile feedback, and bore a small engraved plate that read, "Property of Elijah Turner. If found, please contact the State Commission for the Blind with the number provided below." Williams regarded Matthew with an expression that had transformed from skepticism to anger. "This is a standard mobility cane for the visually impaired. It features reflective safety bands and a registration number. In what capacity does this appear to be a weapon?" Matthew's face flushed. He was holding it in a suspicious manner. The report indicated a black male with a weapon. The report indicated a stick. Williams corrected, accessing the dispatch record on his computer, "And this is unequivocally a white cane, not an implement of violence." He turned to Elijah. "Mr. Turner, I will remove these restraints. I extend my apologies for this unfortunate occurrence." The metallic fastenings unclasped, and Elijah rubbed his wrists. Williams handed him the cane, and Elijah's hands closed around it with palpable relief. He extended it immediately, tapping the floor to orient himself, employing the familiar instrument to construct a mental map of his surroundings. "Where are my spectacles?" Elijah inquired softly. Williams directed his gaze toward Matthew. "You confiscated his spectacles to ascertain if he was feigning his condition," Matthew stated, though his voice had lost all its former assertiveness. Williams proceeded to Matthew's patrol car and retrieved the dark spectacles from the front passenger seat. Upon his return and presentation of the spectacles to Elijah, the sergeant's jaw was clenched with barely suppressed ire. Elijah donned the spectacles, and an immediate sense of relief washed over his countenance. His compromised eyes ceased their futile attempt to process the painfully intense illumination of the police station. "Mr. Turner," Williams stated deliberately, "could you recount precisely what transpired at the bus stop?" Elijah narrated the entirety of the encounter with precise detail. The aggressive tactics, the demand for the weapon, the disbelief that he was visually impaired, the false allegations of reconnaissance for a burglary, the forceful confiscation of his cane and spectacles, and the subsequent apprehension. As he recounted the events, Williams manipulated his computer, his expression darkening. Officer Matthew, Williams stated, his tone chilling. Mr. Turner's name has just surfaced in our records. Do you have any insight as to why? Matthew responded by shaking his head. Because he is listed as a member of the city's ADA Compliance Committee. He provides guidance to the mayor's office and the police department on matters of disability accessibility. Furthermore, he serves as a counselor at the Veterans Disability Resource Center. Williams then rotated the computer screen to face Matthew. He has been blind since his early childhood. This information is substantiated across every municipal database we possess. A pallor spread across Matthew's countenance. Williams continued, undeterred. There's more to this. I've just received correspondence from the chief's office. It appears a video documenting your arrest has achieved widespread notoriety. It has garnered 3 million views within the past hour. The mayor's office is demanding an explanation for why one of our officers apprehended an advocate for individuals with disabilities and confiscated his mobility aid. Elijah spoke with a quiet yet devastatingly precise intensity. Officer Matthew, I have been without sight for 43 years. I have utilized a white cane for 40 years. I instruct other visually impaired individuals on the safe and effective use of canes. I participate in the committee that oversees the police department's adherence to disability legislation. And today, you concluded that none of this held any validity because you were unable to accept that a black man was articulating the truth about his own physical condition. He paused, allowing his words to resonate. I have encountered law enforcement stops previously. I have been subjected to questioning. I have had officers request to see my identification. However, I have never before experienced an officer branding me a deceiver, accusing me of fabricating a medically documented disability, seizing my assistive device, and apprehending me while I was in a state of visual disorientation, uncertain of my whereabouts or the unfolding events. Williams steered Matthew to a secluded area, his voice a harsh whisper that remained audible to Elijah. You apprehended a blind individual. You confiscated his cane. You removed his protective eyewear. You performed all these actions on camera, and you did so to an individual who, by all accounts, advises this department on precisely how to avoid the very transgressions you have just committed. Matthew attempted to interject. I was unaware. You neglected to inquire, Elijah interjected, his voice piercing the quiet of the room. You perceived a black man with a cane and automatically assumed criminality. You heard my assertion of blindness and concluded I was being untruthful. You had every conceivable opportunity to confirm my condition, to examine the cane meticulously, to pose fundamental questions, to contact the number inscribed on my cane, to consult city records. You abstained from all these actions because you had already predetermined your conclusion. Williams turned back to Matthew. You are suspended, effective immediately. Your badge and service weapon are to be placed on the desk. The chief requires your presence first thing tomorrow morning, and I assure you that meeting will not be conducive to your interests. Matthew placed his badge and firearm on the desk, his hands trembling, his professional future visibly disintegrating before his eyes. Elijah stood, his cane in hand and his spectacles restored to his face, and delivered the final, decisive blow with chilling, measured certainty. I will be initiating a federal lawsuit alleging violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, civil rights infringements, assault, and wrongful arrest. Furthermore, I will ensure that every specific detail of your conduct is entered into the public record, so that other individuals with disabilities are aware of the ramifications when an officer dismisses their lived experience of disability as fictitious. He tapped his cane once upon the floor, oriented himself towards the exit, and departed the police station with a measure of dignity that the officer who had apprehended him would never again possess. Officer Brian Matthew was dismissed from the Riverside Police Department 3 weeks following the incident at the bus stop. The termination notice cited numerous infractions, including discrimination based on disability, failure to adhere to ADA protocols, unlawful confiscation of medical equipment, false arrest, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. Due to his termination for cause, after only 8 years of service, Matthew forfeited his pension, his health benefits, and any prospect of future employment in law enforcement. The video depicting him forcibly seizing a blind man's cane had been viewed in excess of 20 million times, and his visage was now irrevocably linked to one of the most flagrant instances of disability discrimination captured on film. Elijah Turner initiated his federal lawsuit 6 weeks after his arrest. The complaint was exhaustive and devastating. It meticulously detailed violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, civil rights infractions under the 4th and 14th Amendments, assault and battery, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit named Officer Matthew personally and the Riverside Police Department, seeking $9.2 million in damages. Elijah's legal counsel convened a press conference where they presented the bus stop security footage and the witness video side by side, showcasing multiple perspectives of Matthew disregarding evident signs of disability and forcibly confiscating a blind individual's mobility aid. The city's legal team reviewed the footage and examined the medical documentation confirming Elijah's blindness since the age of 4. They scrutinized Matthew's personnel file, discovering 8 prior complaints from individuals with disabilities, all detailing comparable patterns of skepticism and aggressive behavior. They noted that Matthew had undergone mandatory ADA training on 2 occasions and had signed acknowledgments affirming his comprehension of disability rights legislation. Defending against the lawsuit became an insurmountable challenge. The evidence was overwhelming. The public relations aspect was exceedingly unfavorable, and the plaintiff was a highly respected advocate for individuals with disabilities who had, in essence, helped draft the very accessibility guidelines that Matthew had violated. The city proposed a settlement of $2 million 3 months after the lawsuit was filed. Elijah's attorneys declined it outright. This is not solely about financial compensation. This pertains to a history of mistreatment directed at individuals with disabilities, which your department has overlooked for years. The case proceeded to trial, and the jury heard testimony that visibly incensed some of its members. Elijah described the profound disorientation and fear experienced when deprived of his cane, rendering him unable to perceive his surroundings or the actions being taken against him. Medical experts elucidated that his specific form of blindness was impossible to feign, and that white canes are classified as protected medical devices under federal law. Other individuals with disabilities recounted their encounters with Matthew, delineating a persistent pattern of disbelief regarding the authenticity of their impairments. The jury deliberated for 5 hours, returning a verdict that sent seismic repercussions through law enforcement communities across the state. They ruled in Elijah's favor on every count, awarding the full $9.2 million, with $70 million designated as punitive damages to penalize the egregious nature of the violation. The jury foreman read a statement asserting that the defendant's actions were not merely erroneous, but rather gratuitously cruel. Seizing a mobility device from a blind individual constitutes assault, and perpetrating this act based on the assumption of falsehood regarding his disability introduces a layer of discrimination that this community will unequivocally not tolerate. Matthew filed for bankruptcy within weeks of the verdict. However, judgments related to disability discrimination are not dischargeable through bankruptcy proceedings. The court mandated the lifelong garnishment of his wages. At 39 years of age, he was relegated to working overnight shifts, stocking shelves in a warehouse for $12 per hour, with a substantial portion of each paycheck diverted to satisfy a debt he would never fully liquidate. He became locally notorious as the officer who refused to acknowledge a blind man's blindness. This reputational stain shadowed him through every job interview, every background check, and every endeavor to reconstruct any semblance of the life he had irrevocably shattered. The Riverside Police Department instituted a comprehensive overhaul of its protocols for interacting with individuals with disabilities. The police chief, who had failed to address Matthew's recurring pattern of complaints, was compelled to retire. New mandatory training was implemented, requiring officers to acknowledge and accommodate disabilities without reservation. A disability liaison position was established, staffed by advocates from the blind and disabled communities. Body camera policies were reinforced to guarantee that all interactions with individuals with disabilities were meticulously recorded and subject to review. 5 additional officers exhibiting comparable complaint histories were strongly encouraged to resign before formal investigations could be initiated. Elijah utilized a portion of his settlement to establish the Disability Rights Documentation Project, an initiative that furnished free recording equipment and legal assistance to individuals with disabilities who encountered discrimination. He continued his dedicated work at the Veterans Disability Resource Center and remained an influential member of the city's ADA board, now possessing considerably augmented influence and esteem. He addressed law enforcement academies nationwide, frequently bringing his white cane and holding it aloft as he narrated his experience. This is not a weapon. This represents freedom. This signifies independence. This is how I navigate a world that was not designed with my needs in mind. And when you forcibly remove it from someone, you are not safeguarding the community. You are assaulting an individual who is already engaged in a struggle simply to traverse the world securely. 5 years subsequent to that September afternoon at the bus stop, Elijah was recognized with a National Disability Advocacy Award. Brian Matthew remained employed in manual labor, persistently making payments towards a judgment that would burden him for the remainder of his existence. The video endured online, serving as an indelible testament to the consequences when conjecture supersedes evidence and when officers refuse to believe individuals with disabilities regarding their own lived realities. The lesson was stark and unforgiving. Disabilities are not contingent upon belief or disbelief. They exist irrespective of whether one chooses to acknowledge them. And when figures of authority presume to possess superior knowledge about disabled individuals' bodies than the individuals themselves, the repercussions can be career-ending, financially ruinous, and permanent. True justice necessitates believing individuals when they articulate their identity and their needs. Share this narrative if you have ever been compelled to validate your disability to someone who erroneously deemed you to be deceitful. What safeguards do you believe are imperative for individuals with disabilities when engaging with law enforcement? Articulate your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you hold the conviction that confiscating an individual's mobility aid is never justifiable, subscribe, as we are committed to bringing you further accounts where ableism encountered accountability and was utterly vanquished.